Welcome to our ongoing serialization of a study in the Gospel of Matthew. We find ourselves in Matthew chapter 23, and we are going to read one verse, verse 15. This is a portion of scripture in which Jesus is, the teaching of Jesus is brought together on his look at the state of leadership in Judaism in the first century. It was not all good. Matthew chapter 23 and verse 15. Alas for you lawyers and Pharisees, hypocrites, you travel over sea and land to win one convert, and when you have won him, you make him twice as fit for hell as you yourselves are. We may believe that the Bible is the key text in the church, but that does not mean we treat every passage in the Bible in the same way. Now, we understand that there are passages that we find in the scripture that are more important. We think of the opening chapter of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word was with God. We understand that in the New Testament is a far more important passage theologically to us than the opening chapters of the book of First Chronicles, where there's a series of genealogies that for most modern people, well, we just don't quite get what's going on there. You see, when we talk about there are passages of scripture that are more important, we're not talking about this. What we are saying is that there are passages in the scripture that do not fit our view of faith. We can think of passages in the New Testament on suffering for the faith, or some of the more extreme statements Jesus makes on discipleship. The reality is that the church in every day and age has its pet texts, and conversely, there are texts of scripture that we do not look to. Now look at the passage before us. Here is a passage that is difficult for evangelicals to hear. Why do evangelicals find this passage so difficult? Take any evangelical church, and here, of course, I'm generalizing, so don't assume that I'm saying absolutely every church. I'm saying when you look at the evangelical movement, we have the ability to just about justify the most bizarre of events and activities in the church. Why? Because what we are doing is justifying them because they are evangelistic. What we see is that our goal is to convert people. And as a result of that need to convert people, because that is evangelism, we will say that just about any activity can be useful and helpful in the church if it leads to the evangelism of people. It is the goal to evangelize or make converts that drives or rationalizes much of what we do in the church. Now, what is wrong with that? Well, if you're a good evangelical, you would say, oh, there's nothing wrong to it. That's the most sacred thing we could do. Well, the reality is, according to Jesus, there may not be quite the same view. You see, we can turn to find scriptures and find verses that justify what we are doing. Does not the fact that Jesus called people to be concerned for the lost justify what we do? Then we turn to this passage, Matthew chapter 23 and verse 15. What happens when you buy into a view of scripture is that you reach a point where you cannot help but see the scripture in that way. Now, this is not something that is particularly, unique to the church. My favorite example of this sort of thing is in the realm of science. A theory comes to dominate as the scientific go-to view of something. And what happens in the realm of science is that view so dominates that all conclusions, all studies, all findings are made to fit that theory. But what will happen eventually is a new theory arises, scientifically speaking, that brings out the reality that the old theory was flawed and that there were some mistakes in it, and that this new theory better fits the facts and understandings we have. And of course, what happens is they go, no, 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 this is the theory. This is heresy because it's not the theory. But what will happen in time is that the overwhelming preponderance of evidence will reveal the fact that this new theory is right. It could be such things as ulcers in the modern era. It could be astronomy in the medieval period. And what we're saying is that we are no different in the church. We can reach the point where we are seeing scriptures in a certain way and making all facts fit into that and blind to what actually is said in scripture. You see, if you end up with a passage that disagrees with your predisposition or presupposition, I should say, then what do? You ignore the passage. You sweep it under the rug, so to speak. What was Jesus saying in this verse? Well, in Matthew 23:15, he was on the one hand rebuking the religious leaders for creating followers of their own warped view of the faith. I think that is the general understanding of the text, that what was going on was that the people were converting people, but they were not so much converting people to faith, but converting people to a view of the faith, of the religious belief system. In other words, they had created converts who needed to be what? Converted. You see, it is not enough for us to convert people if they are not converted to the right type of life. And here we come full circle back to the point. Evangelism in the church is not evangelism if we do not convert people to the right set of beliefs. Go to Matthew chapter 28 and verse 19, in anticipation of where we will eventually work our way to, which is that the goal is what? To make disciples. That's one word in the original Greek. It is to make disciples who what? Obey all things. In other words, it's not just about converting people for the sake of converting. If those people do not become fully functional disciples of Jesus who follow, obey, listen, and live out that faith, we have converted people, but we have not converted people properly. We can create converts to our point of view who are not, in point of fact, actual disciples of Jesus Christ. In fact, the church is at times more concerned to create converts and justify our existence than actually do the hard work of making true, authentic disciples of Jesus Christ.